The metal's looking pretty good. We got some nice reflection going on there, a little bit of blur, a little bit of nice soft lighting, and of course we're using our VPR mode. This is not a final render. But let's just press F9 and see how this looks. When I do this, it says render current frame, no render display active. Do you want to turn on the image viewer? And I'll just hit return and say yes. Now look what happens. Well, the reason this happens is because everything renders through the camera view. And this is one thing I've noticed from many people, myself included, that we are setting everything up in this standard default perspective view. Well, that's not what renders. And it renders here in VPR mode, but it doesn't render for our final. That's the camera view. So it's something just to be aware of. And the way we're going to set up the camera, we're going to close it. Let me close this out. Is select the camera down here at the bottom. Okay. Then we're going to modify. And we're going to take move, and I'm just going to click and drag. Now, let me jump out of VPR mode just to get to like a wireframe. And you see I'm way over here. There's my lights, and I could maybe choose rotate. And it's a little bit of a hassle to move all the way in. So what I'm going to do real easily is, again, the camera is selected. That's what I'm working with. And then under modify, we're going to choose rotate or move. Let's do move first. And then you can just reset this. So all the way down here at the bottom, hit reset. And when you do that, your camera is set right back at the 0, 0 axis. So let me press 4 on the keypad, and we'll just zoom out. And look at my camera. Right there at their 0 axis. Well, that's great. That's a lot easier than trying to physically move it inside the interface. So I'm going to press 6 on my keypad and just click and drag. And I'm able to move the camera because I have move selected. And I'm just clicking and dragging. And with the right mouse button, I can move up. And then press Y to get to my rotate, or spacebar, by the way. Spacebar toggles between move and rotate. And then we can set up our camera any way we want. Now, as we're setting this up, and cameras are something we're going to talk about a little bit later, we also need to consider the resolution of our final. So let's just press P for the properties, and quickly for the resolution, I'm going to choose Full HD, so we're going to go 1920 by 1080. And we'll talk about all these settings in a future video. Okay, so move with the right mouse brings us down. Y on the keyboard gives us rotate, and we can click and drag. T moves it again. Y rotates it again. And just kind of that little combination. You can come over here to wireframe, change this back to VPR, and make sure that we're not overextending from the background there. So I'm just going to rotate down a little bit like that. Now, if I hit F9, now we're going to see a full final render. Okay, so kind of a little bit roundabout way to get there, but it's really important. You can't see what you're doing unless you obviously have something in view of the camera. So look how good Lightwave 11 renders for us. With very little setup and not really any tweaking yet, all we've done is just model the simple hammer. We put some metal and reflections on and put 2 area lights in, and we have a really nice looking render, but we got a long way to go. So we're going to clean up all this noise. We're going to add some wood right now to this, and we can tweak some other things as well. So before I do that, let's save the scene, but I'm going to go save incremental. Just save it as a version. So save scene increment, and that saves it as version 2. Let's open the surface editor back up, and for the handle, the hammer handle, we want to apply some wood. All right, now I'm going to close this just to save some room and so you can see what's happening. All right, so you've seen with the metal how we can apply color and specularity and reflection. Well, what if you want to put an image on there? Not just reflect an image like we did here, but rather put one on there itself. Labels, wallpaper, carpet, furniture, everything you can think of you can map on with an image map. So if you come over here to color, there's a T button. T means texture. Anywhere you see these T buttons, that means you can apply a texture. And you can apply a texture for color and luminosity and diffuse and specularity and bump and everything else. But within that texture panel, you can also apply a procedural texture. So let's do that first. This panel might look a little overwhelming, but it's really, really simple. And once you learn this panel, you can apply it throughout Lightwave. I've talked about this in other training videos in the past, and I'm going to talk about it now because it's really that important. You can apply textures to your environment. You can apply textures to motions. You can apply textures to the bump or the displacement of an object. Okay, so it's very, very important. For this, we're going to apply just the simplest texture, which is just a nice image map right on a handle. Very, very simple. But Let's work our way down. And I always tell people to do this one step at a time. Don't just start clicking around hoping to see something. Be deliberate about it. So what type of texture is it? Well, the layer type, we're going to come back to image map, but let's just choose a procedural. And that means it's a computer generated texture. And as soon as I do that, you can see here in VPR mode that I've got some noise on there. And what noise is that? It's a turbulent noise. And here it is in here. You can click and drag this around in here to see what that pattern looks like. You can click and drag on any of these colors and change those. You can play with the frequencies. And with these little arrows, you click, hold, and drag. You can change the scale of them. Now, one thing that I'm a little disappointed, we still don't have a gang select in here, meaning I have to change all these values at the same time. So hopefully in the future we'll see that. You can play with the contrast and so on. But if you don't like this procedural, there are other ones in here that come with Lightwave. And one of my favorites is Crumple. And Crumple creates this nice little, well, crumpled texture on there. And you can see it right here. It's just sort of a, kind of a nice noisy, veiny type thing. And let's do this. Let's make this like a bright white. I'll give you an idea what this looks like. Let that resolution pop up. It's almost like a refraction, like you'd see underwater. Even though it's not, it's has that kind of look to it. And we can animate that with the E buttons. We're going to do that later on. We'll animate. But E means envelope. Doesn't mean animate, but that is how you animate. It means envelope. All right, so these are procedural textures, and what's great about them is that they wrap around the entire surface. You don't have to worry about XYZ positions. Very, very nice. You can change the scale, position, rotation, and the fall off of this as well. And by fall off, I mean, well, watch. If I just increase the Z fall off, look what happens. It goes away. And that goes from where that initial pivot, the first thing we did, where that pivot point is for the object. So you can have textures fall off from that point. So you can place it just a little bit, almost like it's just dirtying it up. And if you want, we could just leave that on there. What if I made this just kind of a dark brown? Kind of like that, maybe a little bit darker, just so it dirties it up. And just adds a little bit of noise in there for it. Okay. Now on top of that, and let me close out this surface editor. On top of that, let's add an image map. But you don't change this to image map, you have to add a layer. So we have a crumple procedural texture layer on the brush with a fall off, just so it looks like a little dirt noise on there. Then we're going to add image map. And it adds it on top of the crumple. Notice that there's a check mark. You can turn these layers on and off. Opacity is how strong that layer is. Okay, and then from here, we're going to projection. We're going to choose cylindrical. And remember we model this up and down? Well, Lightwave still remembers that. So we're going to want that around the y-axis. But before we get there, what image are we going to use? Well, we're going to say load image. And in your images folder, there is light oak and dark oak. Let's choose light oak and see what happens. All right, doesn't look like much. So I'm going to hit the y-axis, hit automatic sizing. Now you can see how that image is wrapped around there. But notice here that the width wrap amount is set to 1. Let's change this to say 4. Hit the tab key. Well, now it's wrapping multiple times. Well, the image map was stretched around there so much that you really couldn't see it. Now I'm going to press 4 on my keypad. Let me come back, click into the layout and hit 4. And I just want to view this from the perspective view and just kind of rotate around a bit so you can see this. See? So now we can see the stripes on there with the wood. When it was set to 1, it essentially was stretched around there. And you can see it pretty well here, but it wasn't quite tight enough. So by setting it to 4, we get a little bit tighter grain and it wraps a few more times. It tiles it all the way around. If you placed it on the Z, you could see that, let it redraw here, it kind of bunches up at the bottom and the streaks are a little off. Around the X, it looks okay, but it's not quite right. Again, so the reason it worked around the Y is because we modeled this up and down. And Lightwave remembers that data, so now we have that handle on there. So I'm going to copy this selected layer, just like that. So copy, and then choose selected layer, which is the light oak. Use texture, and then open up the surface editor again. And what I'm going to do in here is come down to a bump map. And I'm going to hit the T button for bump. I'm going to paste replace selected layer, and the selected is none. The texture amplitude is the amount of bump, and we'll do some bump maps later on, but just to give you an idea of how cool you can make things look quickly. Now, this bump map I did overdid it, I should say, because I want to give you the idea of what this could really look like. And if I press F9 on my keyboard, you'll actually see how strong this bump is, which is a little too much. Yeah, so it's a little bit too strong, and that's okay. I wanted to show you. But the grain inside that wood is allowing this to bump in and out. So you get those grooves in there. Now, we've not set up anti-aliasing and smoothing and all those things to make it look really pretty, but we know that 1 is too little, 10 is too much. And the reason I'm showing you this is that when you're applying any of these values and you do a little bit, and you do a little bit, and they don't show up, and you do a little bit, you kind of get frustrated. So what I have often done is just, if it's 1, I'll set 10, or maybe it's 10, I set 100. Oh, okay, that's way too much. Now I know I've got a range to work with. So I'm going to set this maybe to 3. And let's press F9 one more time, and we'll see what that looks like. And it just puts a little bit of something in there, a little bit of texture. Even though the handle really should be pretty smooth, it just gives it a nice little life to it. And we can do the same kind of thing in the hammer itself and pit the metal a bit, but okay, so now we've got some grooves in there, and that works just fine. We can put more specularity on here. We could do a few more things like that, and once we put the anti-aliasing on, these ridges will actually smooth out even more. And we'll hit use texture, and we'll close out. All right, so that is putting an image map on a surface. Very, very simple. We're going to do more of that as we move on, but I know a lot of people that sometimes that's all they need, and I want to show you these basics in these first beginning videos. Most of you that are seasoned kind of know this pretty well, but perhaps there's a tip or technique you'll pick up. So again, we had an image map. The blending mode is normal, and when we say blending mode, very much like Photoshop, if you use Photoshop, you can have it add or subtract or have a difference or multiply it. Well, what is it multiplying with? Well, these are layers, just like you would in Photoshop. So you're blending the layers. This blending mode relates to these layers right here. So let's just try one. Let's do an additive. Of course, it gets brighter the way it should. Subtractive gets darker. Difference is between the two of those. And of course, multiply works really well. And it multiplies the top layer with the bottom layer. So you can add all these procedurals, or you can add 2 or 3 image maps. And notice there's a big long space here. You can add as many image maps as you want to a surface and blend them all differently. Even the opacity. You say, I only wanted a little bit. I want to put a little bit of texture on there with a crumple, but I only want it to show up just a little bit, so you can bring the opacity down. So works really, really well. For the tan, we are just going to hit normal. And we can even take the crumple and then click and drag and drop it on top. Okay? Because with 100% image map set to normal, it kind of overrides that procedural texture. So now if you take a look, because we move the procedural on top, and the procedural actually has some alpha values, meaning it's more black and white, it bleeds through and we see the texture on top of the image. And that's how you can create a lot of nice realism, by using an image map and then putting some procedurals on it, just for a little dirt, whatever. And of course, this dirt's a little too sharp. We could soften that up a bit. And perhaps that opacity is a little too much. We can bring that down. But I'm going to save this as is, and you guys can tweak it from there. Just play with these. So save all objects. We'll save all these surfaces and image maps. And then we're going to do a save scene. And I'll click return, and we're good. Use texture. Close these out. I'm going to go into one more video and just talk a little bit more about node editing and what you can do with those. And we're going to put some node editing surfaces on the ground. And that way we've had 3 different types of surfaces with reflections, with image maps, and then with the node editor. And we've got our basics covered. And then we get into some more fun stuff.